Will, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk to us today from White Oak Pastures over in Georgia, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
All right. So what sets White Oak Pastures apart? How are you guys different from the standard model that we see today in the American agricultural system for beef production?
Well, first, thank you for having me on today, Tristan. Appreciate having the opportunity to speak with you. What sets us apart is probably, I guess it's fair to say that there's not many things that we do on White Oak Pastures that someone is not doing somewhere in the country. What makes us different is we are probably doing more of the different things on a larger scale and with more vertical integration than anyone else.
So you actually have your own slaughter facilities, correct?
We do. We have a red meat slaughter facility and a poultry slaughter facility.
Wow, wow. So you're kind of going towards the vertical integration model, which we've talked to some other producers who are doing the same. And it's funny, because we're talking a small family farm here that's going towards a vertically integrated model. Vertical integration has kind of been the model for these bigger companies, right? Cargill, Bayer Monsanto, a lot of these other companies that we see dominating the agricultural sector, they're going towards a vertically integrated model. But how is yours different? I mean, it seems like what you're doing is quite different from what we see with, the Cargill factory farming model. What exactly is White Oak Pastures all about?
Well, I think that what you said is fair, but the large multinational corporations that you mentioned are vertically integrated after the farm level.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them buy commodity products from farmers, and then they're quite vertically integrated from that point forward. In our case, we own land, we own animals, they breed, they grow here on the farm, we slaughter them. The waste from the plants are applied back to the pastures to fertilize the land. Vertical integration is what we are, but it sounds very linear. And what we are is cyclical. We love closed loops. And that more defines who we are and what we do.
So what do you mean by closed loops? Give me an example of that.
Okay, so we, as I said, we have animals, cows, hogs, sheep, goats, rabbits, chickens, turkeys, geese, guineas, ducks, out on the pastures, breeding and growing. We bring them into our plants where we slaughter them. We take all of the waste from the plants and compost it and apply it back to the land. It's very cyclical. The nature, the abundance of nature comes from many, many, many different cycles out on the land. We can talk about it all day. In fact, I'd love to talk to you about it all day. The energy cycle,
Yeah.
carbon cycle, water cycle, microbial cycle, grazing cycle, mineral cycle, etc.
So how you're looking at it is very different than the kind of reductionist model where you're looking at, the input, output, and production. It's not so simple as that reductionist model.
Well, let me address that. It is the antithesis of the reductionist model.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about the difference in complicated and complex. Complicated is like my iPhone or this computer. Those are complicated.
Mm-hmm.
That means there's a lot of different things in there going on. Complex is like your body or the United States government or a major university. A lot of things going on in those as well. Those are complex. But if one component of a complicated system stops, it's a game stopper. If one component of a complex system stops, everything morphs and the system continues to operate. Reductionist science works really well in complicated systems. It does not work well in complex systems because there are unintended consequences. And in modern agriculture, we as a society have attempted to apply reductionist science to a super complex system, and the unintended consequences are just abhorrent.
Mm-hmm. So those unintended consequences would you consider that like, industrialization, kind of the mass industrialized food supply that we see, especially in the latter half of the last century? Would you see that as kind of one of these unintended consequences of this mindset and this way of looking at it?
Well, the way I would say it is the industrialization, centralization, commoditization is the action. It's what we did to make food cheap and abundant and consistent.
Mm-hmm.
And it was wildly successful. It made food obscenely cheap,
Yeah.
and wastefully abundant and boringly consistent. The unintended consequence fell on the back of the welfare of the animals, the degradation of the land, and the impoverishment of rural America.
Yeah, and that seems abundantly clear to people who are trying to get their health back now and trying to figure out quality sources of meat, trying to get places where their animals are humanely raised, trying to get meat from producers that are feeding them only grass, that aren't giving them a lot of possibly pesticide contaminated grains. And it can be relatively difficult for people. So your family has owned this ranch for a long time out in Georgia, right?
153 years. My great grandfather came here in 1866, and I am the fourth generation. My children are the fifth, and my grandchildren, who are still babies, are the sixth generation of my family on the same piece of land.
Where'd your grandfather come from?
My family's originally from Scotland in the 1600s, but my great grandfather, who came here, had a farm about 50 miles away here in Georgia. He was displaced by the Civil War and was fortunate to have an uncle who was a medical doctor here in Bluffton that started him over in 1866. We've been here ever since.
Wow. And raising cattle ever since, right?
Yeah, yes. We've always raised cattle. Now, the way my great grandfather and grandfather would have farmed would have been more like I do today. A lot of different species of animals living in symbiotic relationships with each other.
Mm-hmm.
My father, post World War II, industrialized the farm into a cattle operation, and I ran it that way for 20 years. Then I took it back. I'm taking it back. A model more similar to what my great grandfather and grandfather did.
And this is what fascinates me about your story. I mean, you've seen kind of both sides, right? You've seen the issues and I guess maybe economic benefits of the industrialized model, and then what you're doing now drastically different from that. So you mentioned that what you do now was a lot in line with what your great-great-grandfather would have been doing. What practices was your great-great-grandfather? Great grandfather, right? Not great. Your great grandfather. What type of practices was he implementing, and what was daily life like for him? Did you guys have any records or journals or anything from him?
No, we Harrises are not known for being real good archive keepers. Most of what we know about the way my great grandfather and grandfather farmed is pretty much anecdotal, but I think that history tells us accurately enough how people farmed in the late 1800s and until mid 1900s, and it would have been multi-species, also vertically integrated, processed here on the farm, sold locally, focused really heavily on the land and the animals and the local community. So in those ways, I guess I mimic what they were doing.
What kind of animals are you keeping now? We mentioned cattle. What other animals do you have?
We raise cows, pasture raised, grass feed cows, sheep, goats, and pigs and rabbits, and we slaughter them, hand butcher them here on the farm. We pasture raise chickens, turkeys, geese, guineas, and ducks. Wow. And we hand butcher them here on the farm. We have bees for honey, organic vegetables, pastured eggs. We operate our plants as zero waste facilities. So We turn organs into pet treats and fat into lard and tallow. We may have a leather shop, but we make leather products. There's a lot of little bitty ancillary businesses here that close the loops.
So zero waste. When you talk about zero waste, using the whole animal, nose to tail. What about the hides? You making leather with the hides, or do you do that somewhere else?
We are currently having having the hides tanned elsewhere and brought back here for turning purses and that sort of thing. We have tried tanning here. We're not very good at it. We're still working on it. A lot of the hides don't leave the farm. A lot of them are turned into rawhide pet treats here on the farm. It's all zero waste. One of my heroes is Dr. George Washington Carver. He says many great things, but one of them is, in nature there is no waste. I think that's profound. Waste and diminished resources was created by we humans, and really mostly we European humans. So that's a model that we try and have successfully tried to get away from. We don't talk about waste streams. We talk about nutrient streams.
Yeah, it's funny because that's a big part of what people are talking about now, right? You get a big push of environmentalist sentiment, at least on the surface. I mean, when you kind of dig a little bit more into it, you see where the big money interests are coming into play with this movement as well. But a lot of people talking about sustainability. Sustainable development is one of these big terms, these big catchphrases being thrown around by the UN, by a lot of NGOs, by a lot of big corporations as well. And zero waste as a concept, it's funny that we have these kind of almost marketing terms that we've got to use just for, practices that your great grandfather would have been using, right? Like using the whole animal, being resourceful with the land, and not just looking at it. I guess maybe it comes back now and again to the reductionist mind state when you're looking at a cow and you're just thinking of however many pounds of skirt steak or of loin, or however many pounds of one product from a pig. You're looking at the whole animal. So I think that's really interesting. Now the sustainability dialogue that we see going on today, a lot of people are talking about like waste from cows. You see a lot of the vegan activists, the animal rights activists talking about methane or carbon dioxide and methane being waste products somehow of animal agriculture. What would you say? What do you think about this whole sustainable development trend that we see going on today? And how do you think this is affecting small family farmers like yourself right now?
Well, it seems like there were 2 or 3 questions there. I think that because you mentioned sustainable, and really I think, at least on my farm, we try to get away from that word. Sustainable is not good enough anymore. Sustainable would have been fine before we degraded everything, but now sustainable isn't good enough. We've actually got to be regenerative in what we do. And here we found ways to do that, and it involves animal agriculture. And I'm very proud of the fact that it's kind of a long story, but we were able to have a very expensive study done on this farm called an LCA, life cycle analysis. Very expensive. I couldn't have afforded it. Somebody else, I partnered with someone else who paid for the environmental engineers to come down and do the work. We provided the farm for the testing. And the company, by the way, that did the work is called Qantas. It's a very reputable environmental engineering firm from Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Yeah, so actually I had the study pulled up right now. I thought it was so interesting that General Mills was also involved in the Qantas study.
So General Mills paid for it. So we sell product to Epic, which is a protein bar that was purchased. That company was purchased by General Mills. And I thought when General Mills bought Epic, we probably wouldn't do business with them anymore because it's a large multinational company, and we are not. Yeah. But they have. They continued to do business with us and support us. And in fact, the director of environmental sustainability, or I think it's vice president maybe, a guy named Jerry Lynch came and visited the farm, and he had his purpose for coming was he had questions about the claims being made about regenerative farm practices. Were they truly regenerative? He made the offer to pay for this very expensive study that I could not have afforded to have done.
Yeah.
I agreed to be the guinea pig, and we both owned the information. And I did that with a little trepidation. I didn't know how it was going to turn out. Anecdotally, I really thought I knew what I was doing, but I didn't have the documentation. So he hired Qantas. They came down. They did the study. And what they found, and by the way, the study is on our website. If you go to whiteoakpastures.com, the environmental section, you can see the whole life cycle analysis, the whole study.
And I'll put a link to that. If you guys go to the show page, there will be a link on the show page, which if you're watching on YouTube, down in the description below, you'll be able to link to the study and to the White Oak Pastures website.
So what it showed is that White Oak Pastures for the year that was studied, 2017, was a carbon sink. We actually sequestered almost 1,000 tons more carbon dioxide equivalent than we put up. That's the net, what we put down less what we put up, left 1,000 tons of what was carbon dioxide equivalent in the atmosphere. Was brought and put under the ground where it would do some good, brought from where it would do harm and put where it would do good. And
so when you're looking at carbon, when you look at that deep black soil for the audience, that's what you're seeing. When you cut into the ground, you see that beautiful black soil that hasn't been tilled, that hasn't been disruptive. You've got a lot of carbon being stored there.
My soil is much blacker than it used to be because of exactly what you said. But it's interesting, just very coincidentally, Impossible Burger had Qantas do a study for the same period of time that I had mine done. And it showed that for every pound of Impossible Burger they produce, it emits 3.5 pounds of carbon dioxide equivalent into the atmosphere. Coincidentally, the same environmental engineering outfit found that for every pound of grass-fed beef I produce, I sequester 3.5 pounds of carbon dioxide equivalent. I mean, you can't make that up. That's just incredible.
Funny. And you're not the one out there
So what that means is, if you eat a Impossible Burger, you gotta eat one of mine to break even.
There you go. That's so for the vegans out there, if you want to actually decrease your environmental footprint, start eating the White Oak Pastures beef instead. That would be more vegan according to your own metrics, guys. Wow. And it's funny because, you don't see a lot of cattle ranchers out there talking about, well, this is to save the environment. This is, this is more sustainable. You mentioned that being a key word that you're moving away from. I think that's a good idea because it seems to have been really, really hijacked by companies like Beyond Meat, Impossible Inc., trying to prove that they're somehow more sustainable, but even by their own metrics, they're not. So I think that's a really good illustrator right there. So Qantas, they go around and they're quantifying environmental output of carbon dioxide in systems through analysis of farms and stuff, or how do they do that?
Yeah, that's one of the things they do. And in my case, what they did is they took soil samples, really deep soil samples, 1 meter and more in depth, of land that I've been holistically managing for 20 years, and then 15 years, 7, 3, 1, whatever, and then 0, and they established a trend line that showed that over the 20-year period, my soils have gone from 0.5% organic matter to over 5% organic matter.
Wow.
Of course, yeah, that's a lot of weight. I mean, 1% of soil, a meter deep, is a lot of weight. And all that all that carbon came from greenhouse gases that were breathed in by plants in the photosynthesizing process. Let me tell you a little bit more about organic matter in the soil. I told you mine has gone from 0.5% to 5%. Now, 1% organic matter on an acre of land will absorb over 20,000 gallons of water. And 20,000 gallons of water is a 1-inch rain event on an acre of land. Mm-hmm. So when I started and my soil was 0.5% organic matter, my land would absorb a 0.5-inch rain event. Today, it will absorb a 5-inch rain event. Wow. So not only does that serve to make my land more productive and more drought tolerant, but all of that water, I get 50-something inches of rain in the coastal plains of Georgia. Mm-hmm. A lot of big rain events, 2, 3, 4-inch rain events. All of that water over 0.5 inch would have gone cascading down across the field, down the ditch, into the stream, into the creek, into the river, into the Gulf of Mexico. And that's how you get big, huge dead zones in the ocean. So not only are we benefiting our land, we're benefiting downstream probably equally as dramatically.
What did you do in 20 years to get such dramatic results?
Okay, so what we've done is we call it biomimicry. It's the emulation of nature. And that is in our grazing. And by the way, let me say this: there's so much discussion of cows destroying the earth. Yeah. And as a land manager, as a professional expert land manager, I can tell you there is no way to cost effectively regenerate played out soils without animal impact. Cost effectively. If you've got a trust fund, you can probably buy enough compost to do it. Yeah. But there's no way to cost effectively renovate these played out, farmed out properties without animal agriculture. So what we do, biomimicry, is we bring the animals across the land and let them have a very hard animal impact. But then it's followed by a very long recovery time. The mimicry part is, think about how the earth evolved. You know, even back in the days of the dinosaur, you would have had brontosauruses being moved by Tyrannosaurus rex, herbivores being moved by carnivores. More relate better to huge, in the Great Plains, huge herds of buffalo or bison being moved by timber wolves. Caribou being moved by polar bears, or gazelles being moved by lions. These big herds, they're prey animals. They tend to stay close together because that's their defense. Mm-hmm. Being moved and moved and moved by the predators behind them, so that they really hammer the land, really eat the plants off, tromp in the residue, a lot of feces, a lot of urine, feeding those microbes in the soil, within a very long recovery time before the herbivores come back. Mm-hmm. That allows the plants to recover and grow 1, 2, 3 feet in depth on top, which means they put 1, 2, 3 feet of roots under the bottom. Then you bring the herbivores back through, they eat the top off again. Those roots, 1, 2, 3 foot of roots, slough off, but the carbon is trapped under the soil where it feeds microbes and absorbs water and does what it's supposed to do. Mm-hmm. And that done over and over and over again yields an abundance. And that abundance is the oil and gas and coal that we've been burning for the last 100 years or so, from days gone by. The modern farming practices, people say cows are destroying the earth. No, Bubba, cows are not destroying the earth. Uber intensive, input intensive agriculture is what's destroying the earth.
Yeah.
Putting copious quantities of chemical fertilizers and pesticides and cultivation and on the animal side, subtherapeutic antibiotics and hormones, all those things break the cycles of nature. They break the water cycle, the carbon cycle, the mineral cycle, the microbial cycle, the grazing cycle. And that ceases. Not only is there not an abundance on Earth, but the abundance is in greenhouse gases where they do harm.
So when you went towards the industrial model, you mentioned that, post World War II, was that under your father, the farm kind of got more industrialized. How did it differ back then? What were you guys doing before you went towards this regenerative model that ended up completely changing the way your soil functions? What was done that might have degraded the soil before?
Well, but before the industrialization, they were farming without these inputs. Yeah. In the case of so World War II was a game changer. Ammoniated fertilizer, chemical fertilizer, was actually invented in 1880 or something like that. It was around, but it was prohibitively expensive. It was just an invention that wasn't really used in industrial common farming practices. So in World War II, millions and millions of dollars were spent to build munitions factories for the war effort. When the war was over, those factories were idle, but they could be repurposed to make ammoniated fertilizer. You know how you make bombs out of ammonium nitrate? Remember all that talk? Mm-hmm. You can also take a bomb factory and make ammoniated fertilizer. And that's what they did. So it became very cheap. The first pesticide commonly used was 2,4-D. It's still a very commonly used chemical. And it came from the chemical warfare effort from World War II. Prior to World War II, most people were cultivating the land with mules, animal agriculture. Post-World War II, internal combustion engines they've been around since the late 1800s, but they became cheap and common. So people were plowing with tractors, which was a much more powerful cultivation tool that destroyed the life cycle of the microbes by turning the soil. So, I mean, I'm going to go on and on with this.
Yeah.
World War II was the game changer.
Yeah, it's funny because you mentioned, the fertilizers, chemical fertilizers, the same plants that are producing bombs, making those. During Vietnam, you had Monsanto making Agent Orange to spray over the, to defoliate for the Viet Cong. And you see a very big tie-in between industrial agriculture and chemical warfare. I mean, it's essentially chemical warfare against environmental factors rather than populations of humans, and it's rampant. So, did you guys use?
We talk about insecticides kill insects, fungicides kill fungus, herbicides kill plants. The word "side" means death. My friend Gabe Brown says he's one of the few guys like me that are one of the good old boys that went commando, used to be industrial and turned regenerative. He says every morning when he was an industrial farmer, he'd wake up and say, "What am I going to kill today?"
Wow. Well, it's funny because this industrial farming model is being marketed to us as a humane way of producing food, right? I mean, the vegan movement, you've mentioned the Impossible Burger and the Beyond Burger, Beyond Meat. I mean, these are mostly based on soy, wheat, corn, peas, very, very chemical intensive agriculture. Very, very destructive environmentally, and they're telling us that the cows are so bad, the cows are pooping, the cows are releasing gas in the atmosphere, but it seems like they're missing quite a bit in the narrative there. I mean, you're able to sequester so much carbon in your soil, regenerate the soil, manage the water with your cattle, whereas with the other model, we're seeing massive destruction, massive devastation. So when your farm went towards the industrial model, And you were at mostly animal agriculture, right? Was it strictly cattle at that point when you went industrial?
Yes, my father moved it from monoculture to a polyculture, many species, to a monoculture with cattle. Let me say this,
Mm.
to comment on what you just said about people speaking so vehemently about cows destroying the earth. I mean, I hear it every time I turn on a news channel or read something.
Yeah,
And you know the old term, follow the money. You
exactly.
know, the guy I know that's speaking most loudly right now about cows destroying the earth is Dr. Pat Brown, who is the
Yep.
CEO of Impossible Burger. So I wonder what he's got to gain in that, huh?
It's a huge web of interests that are actually pushing this narrative, and it all comes down to a lot of big foundations. You see a lot of big NGOs pushing money into this: the MacArthur Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, the big investment banks. We're looking at a massive tax scheme being kind of dreamt up by international banking interests, the IPCC. We see a lot of interconnected interests. Al Gore. A lot of these big foundations are going to make a lot of money and plan on making a lot of money through basically taxing things using algorithmic calculations of their environmental impact based on stuff like carbon. Um, and they tend to or they stand to make a lot of money selling products like Impossible Burgers and Beyond Burgers, and they want to get subsidies for it. So they want to get that stuff subsidized, and they want to get tax breaks, and they want to make it so expensive for other people to produce food that only the big players, the huge, global industrial corporate players can can actually produce food. I mean, what do you think about that assessment?
Well, I'll actually take a step further. So if you buy, I rail against high input agriculture.
Yeah.
There was a time when little towns like Bluffton, Georgia. Bluffton, Georgia is a little village of 100 people today. It's right in the middle of my farm. I'm in my office in Bluffton right now.
Wow.
Industrial agriculture made little towns like this irrelevant. They weren't needed anymore. If you ride through rural America, north, south, east, or west, you see thousands of little towns like Bluffton that have become irrelevant. And that's because people stopped buying food from farmers and started buying that food from multinational food companies.
Yes.
And when you do that, you move your financial support from rural America to Wall Street and Silicon Valley. If you buy grass-fed beef from White Oak Pastures or Spencer Smith in Nevada or Greg Gunthorpe in Indiana, or I can go on and on, Gabe Brown in North Dakota, when you buy it from them, you strengthen those little towns in rural America. When you buy it from Impossible Burger or Tyson or Smithville or JBS,
Yeah.
you're sending your money in many cases overseas, JBS and Smithville particularly, but in all cases to Wall Street and Silicon Valley. So that's who Wendell Berry is.
No.
Well, okay, Wendell Berry is he wrote oh God, it just went out of my head. I'll tell you in a minute.
Okay.
He's a poet, farmer, writer from Kentucky, and he's written many great things. One of the things he says is that the consumer votes every day with their food dollar on how they want the world to be, and that is so true. And if you can either vote for industrialized, centralized, commoditized food, or you can buy from an independent family farm that is trying to do it humanely and regeneratively and supporting a local rural community. And the Wendell Berry's book is The Unsettling of America. I'm sorry they went out of my head there, but that's it. That's what it is.
There's so many issues that come up with the industrial agriculture model, and it seems like it's just such a dehumanizing way of growing economically as well. I mean, the impoverishment that we see in rural areas, the destruction of rural communities and the small family farms is one of the most alarming trends. Rural America wasn't really needed anymore when you went towards the industrialized model. And we see a lot of people pushing back against this, but we also see a lot of big money interests in like the World Economic Forum, the UN. The last couple of weeks, we've seen a lot of media attention, big, expensive media campaign with this young girl being used to front it, Greta Thunberg. What do you think about this global economic push right now that we see for a globally integrated food supply that's perhaps even subsidized by carbon taxes and stuff like that? Do you see this as beneficial or dangerous, or what do you think about this whole global food production narrative that we see being pushed right now?
Yeah, I'm probably not as informed as I should be to make comment on that. I kind of above my pay grade. For me, it's a much more simple matter. People. One of the things that my former friends, industrial farmers, say is that farming the way I farm can't feed the world. And my comment to that is several things. One is, well, maybe I'm not meant to feed the world. Maybe I'm meant to feed Southwest Georgia, or maybe I'm meant to feed a much smaller area. One of the I'm not an advocate of our USDA farm program. I think that it takes a tremendous amount of taxpayer money and incentivizes the wrong things. And I'd rather incentivize nothing than incentivize the wrong things. But in incentivizing growing commodity crops like corn, soybeans, wheat, in my country, peanuts, cotton, sugar and tobacco were always thrown up in the past. Farmers are said to receive these huge subsidies, and they do, but the farmers really don't get the ultimate benefit from it. For the most part, those funds pass through the farmer and wind up in the hands of the large multinational corporations. The farmers in this country raise those commodity crops that I mentioned, and for the most part, pretty much break even in the production. And their profit comes from the government payment. And the way those crops are raised are not regenerative. And then those commodities exist, and in many cases they're dumped into the export market at below cost of production, which prevents other countries from developing a viable agriculture. Yeah. So there's just a whole lot wrong with the way food business is managed. Man, most of that, I think, is from the multinational corporations that have these lobbyists. Two things. One is these lobbyists that can shape the legislation, the subsidy programs the way they want it. And the other one is these brilliant advertising people that spin the way they produce products, so that the consumer is just intentionally, hopelessly confused. And their voice is so loud. If you keep picking on Impossible Burger only because I think they deserve it, but if they spin the fact that their product, plant-based protein, is so much better for the environment than industrial beef, and they can say it so brilliantly and so loud, there's no room for people like me to say, yeah, but this is not industrially produced beef. This is a whole different deal. Yeah. And it's not just better than industrial produced beef, it's also better than Impossible Burger.
It's funny, they talk about industrial produced beef and it becomes kind of a straw man, right? Because the same company, all right, so the same big multinational seed corporations that are providing the base ingredients for the Impossible Burger, right? You have a GMO soy, all right, so you have a modified heme from GMO soy. It's a genetically modified thing to mimic myoglobin in red meat, to mimic the juices in meat. They've genetically modified a soy protein. So we've got massive grain corporations have control of the input supply and the input supply chain for these replacement foods. And those corporations are the ones who started the factory farming system in the first place. Now they're pointing to it and say, look, we're going to get rid of the factory farming system. We're going to feed you Impossible Burgers. This is so great. Oh, look, isn't it so great? And you follow the money and you look at what's really going on, and they're just trying to vertically integrate even more and cut out the middlemen like farmers, right? Like ranchers. They don't want to have to buy cattle from the ranchers. They would much rather just process the plants into food and sell it directly to the consumer. There's way more profit and there's less middlemen involved.
And the big multinational meat corporations that we're talking about also have plant-based protein options. So,
Exactly.
as long as they get to sell, billions of people on Earth their protein, it doesn't really matter to them where they buy the raw material from, whether it's a feeder calf from some farmer in Georgia or Indiana or Kentucky, or whether it's soybeans from some farm in Iowa. That doesn't matter.
You said it so beautifully when you said it was such a nice, humble way of saying, of pointing out the arrogance of saying we're going to feed the world, right? I mean, you have these kind of technocrat bureaucrats sitting in offices who've never produced a piece of anything in their life from the ground, talking about how are we going to feed the world. I mean, it's a very arrogant utopian mind state that's going into these discussions, and of course, who stands to benefit but the big multinational corporations who are setting the policies and pushing for carbon taxes so that they can create this huge shell game scheme of basically boosting their profits more and further industrializing the food supply. At least that's kind of my assessment of what we see going on here with the talk of the Green New Deal and all this stuff. It just, to me, it sounds like more scams to incentivize further industrialization of the food supply, and it's it seems like a dangerously expensive push that they're going for right now, which is why it's so important that guys like you are out there with with White Oak Pastures talking about these issues and producing good food that people can get directly from the farms, cutting out the middleman and getting them from producers like yourself.
Let me surprise you a little bit here. So I do agree with what you said, but one thing that might surprise you is I did recently come out and say good things about the Green New Deal, but it deserves further explanation than just that. It would be unfair to say I support it as it is. What I said is, the Green New Deal, I don't want to get into politics too deep, but the Green New Deal, inarguably, is pretty much the work product of the New York representative AOC and that the other representatives called the Squad. And they are the fabricators of the Green New Deal, which I think was generally not done well. And I think that the implementation of it, the announcement of it, was horribly botched. But here's my comment. I am not part of AOC and the Squad. I am too old, too white, too Southern, too male, too agrarian, too rural, ... But I find some common ground in the proposal of the Green New Deal, because I think that the old farm program that we just discussed incentivizes too many of the wrong things. So my point was, if there's something in that discussion that AOC and the Squad and Will Harris and White Oak Pastures can find some common ground in, maybe folks ought to reach across the aisle and kind of look at some new considerations. So that was my point with that.
Interesting. So did you said you want to see some reforms on the farm bill, and people took it as you want AOC to be empress of the world?
That's well said. Yeah, very well. That is what the first part is what I meant. The second part is not what I meant.
Yeah. No, it's fun. Well, the internet, everything gets really spun out of perspective, and but I think these. Go ahead.
I'll say one thing about you about feeding the world. So, because I am previously have farmed industrially and been part of the chemical fertilizer, pesticide side of the business, and have changed up. And because I still know the people in that side of the business, I have conversations with them frequently. And one of the things that they say is, well, the way you farm is fine, but you can't feed the world like that. And my comment is usually, well, let's have that discussion. But before we have that discussion, let's stipulate that the earth has a limited carrying capacity. We can't keep increasing population exponentially forever. I mean, there's a carrying capacity for the earth. And most industrial producers don't want to acknowledge that, but they know you can't put so many people in a phone booth. So they'll eventually say, okay, well, I mean, at some point, technology takes a long way, but at some point there'll be too many people. It's okay, good, thank you for that stipulation. Now, if what we run out of first is land, your production model is better than mine, because with high input production, you can raise more food on an acre of land than I can, if that's the only consideration. You win. But if it's petroleum, I win, because I don't use as much as you. If we run out of water, I win, because I don't use as much as you. Mm-hmm. And if we run out of phosphates in the phosphate mines, and potassium in the potassium mines, I win. Or if we run out of antibiotics that the pathogens are not immune to, I win. And I can dead zones in the Gulf. I can go through many situations, many scenarios in which this farming system has a longer term success rate than the current industrialized, centralized, commoditized system. But if it's land, then that system is better.
So you mentioned the grazing techniques. Do you use mobile electric fences, or do you have much bigger paddocks? How do you do the rotational grazing out there?
We've used both. I tend to be more of a permanent kind of. We've been on this farm 153 years. We tend to take a very long generational view of asset construction. So we tend to build more permanent fences. White Oak Pastures, although we still do use some temporary fencing. White Oak Pastures is 3,200 acres contiguous in one plot.
Nice.
And it's basically divided up into about 130-ish acre paddocks with permanent fencing. So we move animals just about every day to provide what I've described to you earlier as a really hard animal impact with a really long recovery period between impacts. And it is really magic for what it does for the animals and for the land. And in a perfect world where there was plenty of labor and time, you might develop a grazing plan that literally had cows being followed by sheep, being followed by goats, being followed by poultry, being followed by pigs, something like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. The biggest difficulty is all of these animals, and all these animals have different animal impacts on the land. Mm-hmm. So there's a reason for wanting to move different species at different times onto a given parcel. A problem in doing that is these animals move at different speeds. Cattle, they move very quickly. You can move cattle from one paddock to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, very, very quickly. Birds are much slower in getting them across a piece of real estate. So what we have gone to is, it's still multi-species, it's still all out there together, but I call it prescriptive grazing. And in prescriptive grazing, I look at the next parcel to be grazed and decide what impact it needs. Maybe it needs cows, maybe it needs hogs, maybe it needs goats, maybe it needs goats followed by hogs. And then, I inform the species manager, and they put the animals where I think they'll do the land and the animal the most good. So it's very prescriptive in nature, just like like going to the doctor and saying, this is what you need. But instead of a dose of penicillin, it's a dose of hogs.
Nice. So you got the hogs, you have the fowl, you've got goats, you got lamb, you got beef. I know that you provide some animals to ButcherBox, right? So ButcherBox, somebody that we affiliate with. Big shout out to ButcherBox. If you, there will be a link down in the description below. If you're looking for high quality grass-fed beef, as well as really good quality pastured pork and organic chicken, check out the link below for butcherbox.com/primalbox. You can get special deals from Primal Edge Health. But what products do you actually, what animal foods do you actually provide for ButcherBox?
I'm not sure what we're selling them right now. My daughter handles that, but pretty much whatever they want. They can get beef, or more specifically ground beef, or more specifically flank steak. They can get lamb, or more specifically leg of lamb, or more specifically ground lamb. So, because we raise so many different species, and because we do the slaughter and fabrication here on the farm, customers like ButcherBox can get anything they want to, anytime they want to. And we also have a website with an online store, whiteoakpastures.com, and where most of our products actually ship direct to consumers through FedEx.
Oh, that's great. All right, so whiteoakpastures.com, people can get, do you guys do steaks, or what kind of stuff do you have there on the website?
Well, you can get absolutely any cut of beef you want, or any cut of pork you want, or any cut of lamb, or goat, or chicken, or duck, or turkey, or it's it's a very, very wide selection. When we slaughter an animal, we got to sell it all. We can't slaughter an animal and just sell fillet. We got to sell oxtail and shanks and,
nice.
And all of it. And unfortunately, because we do offer it online, and there are people of so many different ethnicities and from so many different places, that everything moves. Culturally, we Americans, we want chicken breast and ribeye steaks, and thank God there are people that want the more obscure cuts and organs and those sort of things. And I like those things too.
And you guys provide liver? Can people buy liver, heart, kidney from you?
Liver, heart, kidney, pancreas,
nice.
Whatever's in the animal. There are certain parts of the animal that USDA won't let us sell. The digestive system. We're not able to sell tripe or chitlings, which is the same in hogs.
Yeah.
But and the central nervous system tissue, like brain and spinal cord, is not. They won't let us sell that.
What do you guys do with that? So when you're slaughtering, you can't sell the brain, the spinal cord, central nervous system. You got a bunch of dogs out there, or what do you do with it?
No, thank you for asking. We generate about 9 tons a day, 5 days a week, of non-marketable stuff from our red meat slaughter plant and our poultry slaughter plant. 9 tons between the two plants. Yeah. Those are things like feathers, heads, central nervous system tissue, the eviscerate, gut fill, the things that we just can't sell. Those are composted here on the farm. Nice. And spread back on the land. Zero waste, which we're very proud of. And the compost that we make and spread is just so good for the land, like the essence of life. Yeah. Also, things like tracheas and penises and esophaguses that used to be waste, we now dehydrate and sell as pet treats. And, I wish every animal we had a half a dozen tracheas and penises and esophaguses, because it's really big seller. We don't castrate, we sell testicles for human consumption, and we sell out.
Yeah. Well, people don't realize how good testicle is. I mean, sauteed testicles is amazing. I mean, people giggle when they hear about it, but it's actually, if you don't, most parts of the world, we live in Ecuador. I don't know if I told you that. We live over here in Ecuador. I use the whole animal too, and we feed scraps to the chickens. So if we were slaughtering as many animals as you do, and having hogs, I know I don't know what sort of practices are legal in the U.S., but what about feeding? Hogs love meat, chickens love meat. Do you give them some of the composted matter that you're not unable to bring to market?
Well, no, you legally can't feed raw meat to livestock in this country. You're right. Hogs and poultry, particularly, are monogastrics. Not ruminants. They will have a ravenous appetite, but it is illegal, and there is some opportunity for a spread of disease if you're not very, very careful. So we can't do that, but we do turn it into compost, which we feed the microbes in the soil, which feed the plants, which feed the animals. So yeah, they eat it, but they eat it after it goes through 2 or 3 different biological conversions.
Yeah. It's just funny, how much regulation. And, of course, with the factory farming system, you do need regulations with this stuff because, poor practices in a factory farming system would definitely result in all sorts of diseases and stuff. But, I don't know. I mean, it's just fun. I guess if you live in a city and you don't have chickens, you don't have hogs, and you don't realize that you can feed, you got bones left over from broth, you throw them out with the hogs, they're going to eat them. You throw them out with the chickens, they're going to eat that stuff. And, I mean, I guess it's kind of a shame that small family farms can't do certain things that could be, healthy practices for the animals, but I do understand the regulations there. But man, my chickens, they love it. When we finish, if we have a bone or something, they'll fight the dogs for the pickings of the scraps off of that bone.
And actually, the bones like that for broth, when it's been cooked, is certainly good for the animal, and it is legal. We make we run the fat into tallow and lard. We turn bones into stock and demi-glace. So we pickle vegetables. We freeze vegetables. We pickle eggs. We try to do it, and all that stuff is available online on whiteoakpastures.com.
That's great. So people can get fat. Can they get suet? You ever sell chunks of suet, slabs of suet?
We sell suet as well. Suet,
that's great. Course,
for those that don't know, home is the internal fat that's around organs, and so it's a longer
really flavorful
fat. It's waxier fat because of real place.
Yeah, waxy is a good word for it. Sometimes they'll get some soft ones, but yeah, it's suet can be really nice. And it's good to make tallow with, which tallow's got a lot of uses. I know there's probably a lot of people listening right now who would love to find a good source of suet, grass-fed fat, grass-fed beef. Make sure to check out White Oak Pastures. Will, I really appreciate you coming on and taking time out of your day to talk to us over here. Is there anything new coming down the line? Anything exciting you'd like to share with us about about what White Oak Pastures is doing?
Yeah. One of the things that I'll tell you, the most exciting project that we are working on for 2020 is there's a very large solar renewable energy array going in near my farm. And we are working on the memorandum of understanding to graze, do the vegetation control with my livestock instead of string trimmers and lawnmowers and Roundup. So it's called Silicon Ranch is the name. They're great people from Memphis, and they Nashville. But the way we talk about it is, there was reductive energy like coal powered electric plants. That's reductive. And then there was renewable energy like wind and solar. Now this is regenerative energy. It's the solar, but also the system, the cycles are working, so we're sequestering carbon in the ground. So you're not just breaking even. when you use that electricity, you're actually supporting a system that pulls carbon out of the atmosphere and puts it in the soil.